Index funds are one of the easiest ways that you can invest your money to build wealth over time passively. This pretty much means that you can have your money work for you without putting much time or energy into it at all. In fact, all the index funds that I'm about to show you over the past 10 years averaged an annual return anywhere from 7.7% all the way up to 20.86%. Where if you average 10% per year in a portfolio that you invest $7,000 per year, which is $583 per month, you would have over $1 million after 30 years. And even better, if that were in an account like the Roth IRA, that would be completely tax-free. So to get straight to it, the number one on my list to hold for life is the Vanguard S&P 500 Index Fund, where the ETF version has the ticker of VOO, and the mutual fund version is VFIAX. If you want to learn more about the differences between index funds, mutual funds, and ETFs, I've made an entire video on that. If you want, I'll have it linked in the description below for you to check out. But to sum up the difference between the two, ETFs are pretty much more tax efficient. They can be bought or sold similar to typical stocks, and they can be purchased on nearly any investment platform. Where a mutual fund is not as tax efficient, should only be bought on the particular platform, which for this case is Vanguard, and the trades only go through at the end of the market day. So with the Vanguard S&P 500 Index Fund, the fund tracks the S&P 500 Index, which is pretty much an easy way to invest into 500 of the largest companies that are traded on the US stock exchanges. And just so you know, Vanguard has some of the most popular index funds that are available, and there's a reason why Warren Buffett pointed out to his wife to have 90% in the Vanguard S&P 500 after his passing. So with the Vanguard S&P 500 fund, it has a 0.03% expense ratio, which is the cost it takes to own the fund per year. So for every $10,000 you have invested, that is $3 per year in fees, which is actually really cheap when you consider the fact that you're getting all this exposure with just a few clicks of a button. Now, since this fund invests into many companies, which all funds do, there's going to be plenty of exposure to different markets, with the top sectors in the fund being 32.5% in info tech, 12.4% in financials, 11.7% in healthcare, and so on. Which, to get a better idea on where exactly this data is coming from, the top holdings in the fund consist of 7.2% Microsoft, 6.6% Nvidia, 6.6% Apple, and so on. And best of all, with this fund over the past 10 years, it has averaged a 12.82% annual return, where since 2010, that number is even larger at 14.51%. But to give you a better long-term understanding, with the S&P 500 over the past 50 years, it has averaged an 11.47% return, assuming dividends being reinvested, and when you adjust for inflation, the return is 7.39%. All in all, this is the most common index fund that is referred to as the stock market benchmark, and if the US economy is growing, so will the S&P 500, which historically, over time, the economy is always developing. Now, if you are actually on Vanguard's platform and you are in a tax-advantaged account like a Roth IRA, you may want to get their mutual fund version, and for this case, the ticker would be VFIAX, which the stats are all around going to be extremely similar. Moving on from there, the number 2 Vanguard index fund is through a mid-cap index, which is the ticker VO, or the mutual fund is VIMAX. This fund specifically seeks to track the performance of the CRSP US Mid-Cap Index, which measures the investment return of mid-cap size stocks. With this index fund, it has a 0.04% expense ratio, with the largest sectors that it covers being industrials at 20.7%, technology at 14.5%, then financials and consumer discretionary in the 12% range. You can also see that there's less weight toward individual companies because the top holdings have at most roughly 1% weight in the fund. You'll also notice that you probably don't know many of these top companies when compared to the top 10 that are in the S&P 500, which there is currently 316 holdings inside of this fund. And if we look back at the performance over the past 10 years, the fund has averaged a 9.1% annual return, and since 2004, that number is 9.55%. All in all, if you want to gain additional exposure to different markets, adding some of this may be a good option, which, knowing that if you are interested in getting the mutual fund version, the ticker for that is going to be VIMAX. Moving on from there, the number 3 Vanguard index fund is going to be a small cap index, that is the ticker VB, or mutual fund version is VSMAX. This fund specifically seeks to track the performance of the CRSP US Small Cap Index, which measures the investment return of small cap size stocks. So with this particular fund, it has a 0.05% expense ratio, with the largest sectors that it covers being industrials at 22%, consumer discretionary at 16.1%, then technology and financials in the 13% range. The fund has more holdings than the first two because there's currently 1,403, where you can also see the weight toward each one is even less, at the most one being roughly 0.5%. So knowing that, if we look back at the performance over the past 10 years, the fund has averaged an 8.08% annual return, and since 2004, 2004, that number is 8.97%. So adding this to your portfolio would also give you additional exposure to different markets, and if you're interested, the mutual fund version is going to be VSMAX. So just to keep things rolling, the number 4 Vanguard Index Fund is a way that you could do this all at once if you do not want to invest into all three, and that is through a total stock market index, which is the ticker VTI. The mutual fund version is VTSAX. So this fund pretty much tracks the performance of the entire US total market index, which means that it contains equity from large, mid, and small cap stocks. So if you didn't want to go through buying the first three I mentioned, you can simply buy this one to gain just as much exposure, but in one purchase. The reason this is important to know is because if you got VOO, the S&P 500 ETF, and you got the total stock market ETF VTI, there's actually an 86% overlap by weight, which means each fund contains many of the same investments. On a personal note, instead of getting just the one and make it simple, I actually prefer to get the three, because then I can actually see the performance of each one, and I have the control to allocate however much I want toward each. But anyways, with this fund, it's going to come at a 0.03% expense ratio, with the largest sectors that it covers being technology at 35%, consumer discretionary at 14%, and industrials at 12%, and so on. And like I said, because this is a total stock market, it's going to have a lot of exposure on that one purchase, and that's why there is 3,674 holdings, where the top ones come from Microsoft, Apple, and Nvidia at roughly 5 to 6%. And if we look back at the performance over the past 10 years with this fund, it has averaged a 12.1% annual return, where since 2001, that number is 8.7%. And knowing this, if you are interested in getting the mutual fund version, it's going to be under the ticker VTSAX. Just so you know, of all the index funds I'm showing you in this video, I do own at least one of each of these options, and if you're interested in seeing how I allocate my investments, consider checking out my private newsletter. I'll have linked in the description below. Moving on from there, the number 5 Vanguard Index Fund is going to be an infotech fund that is under the ticker VGT, and the mutual fund version is VITAX. So this fund tracks the performance of stocks in the information technology sector, and it comes at a 0.1% expense ratio, with the largest sectors in the fund being semiconductors at 30%, system software at 22%, and technology at 18%. The fund currently has 320 holdings, where you can also see there is a ton of weight toward only a few companies like Microsoft at 16%, Apple at 16%, and Nvidia at 14.5%. That means that 47% of this entire fund is going toward only 3 investments. Just be aware of this allocation, because if you had all your money in this fund specifically, and say you had $10,000 invested and those 3 companies went bankrupt, which the odds are really low, but for information purposes, that means your $10,000 would have declined to $5,300. Now, if we look back at the returns over the past 10 years, this fund has achieved extremely high returns, so it could be more risk overall to invest in, but it has achieved a 20.86% annual return, where since 2004, that number is 13.5%. And don't forget, if you plan to get ETFs, you can purchase them on nearly any platform. So if you decide to get started and you want to sign up on an investment platform like Webull, you can actually sign up using my link in the description below to get at least $60 worth of free stock when you make your first deposit of any amount. Moving on from there, the number 6 Vanguard Index Fund is going to be through a consumer discretionary fund that is the ticker VCR, with the mutual fund being VCDAX. With this fund, it seeks to track the performance of stocks in the consumer discretionary sector, which means it includes stocks of companies that manufacture products and provide services that consumers purchase on a discretionary basis. You'll understand this more when I show you the top companies in the fund, but this one currently has a 0.1% expense ratio, with the largest sectors being broadline retail at 26%, auto manufacturers at 13%. There's currently 304 holdings, where you can also see there's a ton of weight toward companies like Amazon, where it's nearly a quarter of the entire fund, then Tesla at 10.5%, and Home Depot at 6.5% thereafter. Just be aware of this allocation, because if you had all your money in this fund and Amazon were to go bankrupt, your portfolio would be hit significantly, and let's just say it was $10,000, that would drop all the way down to $7,500 from the performance of one company. But there's also a flip side where the growth could also be substantial if Amazon performs well. Now, if we look back at the performance over the past 10 years, this fund has averaged a 12.5% annual return, where since 2004, that number is 10.7%. With these returns, it's great because there's only an 11% overlap with this fund and the popular S&P 500 ETF VOO. I personally think this is a diamond in a rough, because not many people really talk about it, but I still think it adds tremendous value to a portfolio. So knowing that, if you are interested in getting the mutual fund version, the ticker is going to be VCDAX. And last but not least, the number 7 that I also think is a potential diamond in the rough that no one talks about, which is through a materials index fund that is the ticker VAW, or mutual fund version VMIAX. VFIAX. This fund seeks to track the performance of stocks in the materials sector, which includes stocks of companies that extract or process raw materials. With the fund, it has a 0.1% expense ratio, with the largest sectors being chemicals at roughly 25%, industrial gases at 20.4%, and so on. The fund currently has 120 holdings, where you can see the top holdings consist of Lind at 16%, Sherwin-Williams at 5.5%, and many others. And if we look at the performance over the past 10 years, this fund has averaged a 7.7% annual return, where since 2004, that number is 8.94%. Although it's the lowest return you're going to see in this video, I do really like VAW and VCR because they're two options that you can use to gain exposure, improve your diversification, while still achieving strong returns historically. In fact, VAW only has a 2% overlap with the S&P 500 ETF VOO, so adding this to the portfolio might be a solid option. Also understand that I'm not a financial advisor, this is just information, and I'm not telling you what to do with your money. Now, like I said, if you're interested to see my entire portfolio and how I allocate my investments, check out the private newsletter I have linked in the description below, as well as other free guides and resources that I've created that I think you could greatly benefit from. And don't forget, if you want to sign up and start investing on Webull, you can actually get over $60 worth of free stock when you make an official deposit of any amount. And as always, don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, and notifications button for future content like this. Thank you.